Now, for many generations, the BMW 3 Series has represented the very pinnacle of driving pleasure within the compact executive saloon segment. Now, in its LCI form, this G23 Series, the very latest generation, promises all the same dynamics of the vehicles that we've seen before, but now with improved technology, as well as improved refinement, comfort and poise. But of course, that's what BMW says. Is that necessarily the case? Before we find out, be sure to hit subscribe and hit the bell to be notified every time we make a new upload. But ladies and gentlemen, this is our review of the BMW 330i M Sport. This being the LCI model means that there are some aesthetic changes over the vehicle that it replaces. So for starters, the kidney grille is now even larger than before, for better or worse, but at least it doesn't stretch into the bumper. And they are flanked by new LED headlights replete with a new daytime running light signature. Now for the 330i, we still only get automatic high beam. If you want matrix LED headlights, you have to step up rather to the M340i. You also don't get fog lights, instead you get very large and prominent air breathers replete with a little bit of contrast black against this color. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the front end of the new 3 Series is a little bit divisive, especially to me. I can't quite decide how I feel about it, especially when it comes to these daytime running lights, which to me look a little comical. That sense of comedy, however, does not stretch to the side of this car because, again, the 3 Series maintains those very classic cabin rearward proportions that we've come to understand and respect of BMW. So you have this very nice long bonnet, very short overhangs, and of course this car rides on 18-inch dual-tone alloy wheels wrapped in Michelin Pilot Sport 4 tires. Now on the alloy wheel designs, these are obviously new for the 330i. The problem that I have with them is that these are the same units used as the long wheelbase 3 Series from both the pre-LCI and now the LCI models. The reason I bring that up is because if I've bought a 330i, I don't want to be seen as a 330li customer. The reason being, people who buy 330li's are very strange, whereas people who buy 330i's are a little bit more mainstream and know what they're talking about. Now, this being an M Sport model means you get the M Sport badge on the fender, and of course you get the shadow line pack, which means that the trims around the windows are done up in gloss black rather than chrome. And against this grey colour, the name of which I can't quite recall, it certainly does look pretty interesting, although I would suspect that against a darker colour, it might not be quite so successful. And that same sense of meh kind of extends to the tail end of this car, where it now gets a new rear bumper replete with that sort of L-shaped graphic that we saw on the front, and a very prominent rear diffuser, which does absolutely nothing. Now on this 330i, we get dual exhaust tips, circular exhaust tips. On the M340i, I believe they're trapezoidal, or is that just the Li? I can't remember. BMW is very complicated with these things. And overall, the back end, I think, is a little bit more successful than the front, but it's still not about to win any beauty awards. The one place where it might win some praise is in terms of practicality, because behind this spring-loaded manual boot, you will find a good amount of space. You can fit easily 5 people's worth of luggage in here, and of course if you need even more space, you can fold the rear seats 40-20-40 for even more practicality. And if you have already folded those seats and you're looking for even more space, don't go looking for it underneath the boot floor, because there's only a battery in there. Not even a spare, not even a wheel well, not even a space saver, nothing. Anyway, now that I've closed this manual boot, let's see if these interior upgrades maybe justify it. And on the surface, it seems there is some stuff going on here. So for starters, we now get a new infotainment setup, which seems to have been lifted straight out of the BMW iX, replete with a new instrument cluster sort of setup here. And it certainly looks a little bit more flash. However, I'll get into that a little bit later. We also get a heads-up display, which on a BMW is usually relatively functional and very, very high resolution. So that certainly looks quite nice. Now, in terms of practicality, before we get to the infotainment system, we do have a couple of cup holders here, a wireless charger, decently sized door bins replete with bottle holders, and underneath here there is a rather shallow little bin with a single USB-C port here. There are also a couple of ports over here, one 12-volt socket and a single USB-A for you to connect your phone. Not that you need to do that because this car does come with wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Finally, no needed subscription for that. You also get a pretty decently sized glove box here, and the front seats are relatively well adjustable with adjustable side bolsters, adjustable lower thigh support, although there is no lumbar because it's a BMW. Now, talking about the technology, this is the bit where I get a little bit frustrated. Now, BMWs have very, very good ergonomics traditionally because you have all the HVAC controls here, you have those touch-sensitive buttons here for your infotainment system in order to change track or change your radio presets and so on, and you have the iDrive controller here. However, for this facelift, BMW has decided that simplicity should not be the way. Instead, complication is the future. I say this because they've redesigned the center stack to remove the HVAC controls, which used to be nestled right here between the center air conditioning vents, and they've now integrated it into the infotainment system, just like the BMW iX. Which means if I'm sat here and I want to adjust the temperature, that's not too difficult. I can just tap the little screen here. However, if I want to adjust the air recirculation, for example, that requires one button press here, one button press here, and then I have to select the air recirculation mode that I want, and then I have to go back and I have to find my Android Auto so I can continue using my Waze. Because that seems perfectly sensible, doesn't it? The same goes for the instrument cluster, where previously the digital instrument cluster in the 3 Series was presented with like a couple of dials and a nice little housing binnacle thing, and it was very easy to use. However, complication is the future, which is why now this display is very ornate, it's got very nice graphics, and it looks very pretty if I was trying to use a screen in a 5-star hotel. Instead, in a car, I have no idea what the hell is going on. The rev counter seems to do its own thing. I do not understand the speedo on the left side because I just looked at the digital cluster. And if you think the heads-up display is its saving grace, it isn't, because whatever is here is basically projected there with the same ornate nonsense replete with the same blue and gold graphics. Why? At the very least, BMW hasn't gone the full route as Mercedes-Benz with touch controls on the steering wheel, because instead we get a nice M Sport steering wheel, nice and thick, with physical buttons that are very easy to use. Although I suspect if BMW has its way, these are about to get very complicated in the next generation too. Why? Because complication is the future. What's mercifully a bit more simple is the rear half of the 3 Series, because with this generation, obviously it did get a little bit bigger, not with the LCI, with the new generation. Keep up, will you? And this front seat setup in my driving position gives me a decent amount of knee room, and I have very good under-thigh support, and I can tuck my feet in underneath the driver's seat, which means I can stretch out here and be quite comfortable. These seats are relatively well scalloped as well, which means I have very good support laterally too. I get my own climate controls here with a couple of USB-C ports down there. I have decently sized door bins, and if I lower this, I also have a couple of cup holders here should I need it. Now, being a compact executive saloon, naturally you do get ISOFIX mounts too back here for children, although you do not get blinds here in order to block the harmful UV rays from the little baby children. That said, however, quality back here is still quite good because you still have all the same soft touch materials as you got on the front, repeat, with a little bit of ambient lighting here. So again, it does feel relatively upmarket, and I can imagine that spending time back here wouldn't exactly be torturous. But that said, BMWs are about the driving experience, and as we've seen in the front, clearly complication is the future. So is driving the 3 Series now a very complicated matter? I certainly hope not. Now, the thing about a 3 Series is that, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, it is meant to be as much a luxury car as it is something dynamic and something truly engaging to drive. Now, when you're driving about in town, the 3 Series is certainly very competent. It's relatively quiet, relatively hushed, and it allows you to get through day-to-day urban traffic without too much incident and too much issue. And that's kind of what you want from a vehicle like this, because the majority of 3 Series buyers, being slightly younger, being slightly earlier on in their career, will be spending undoubtedly a lot of time stuck in traffic coming in and out of KL. But the beauty of the 3 Series has always been that once the roads open up, there is so much more to enjoy. And this is where I start to take a little bit of issue with this car, because you see, the 3 Series is supposed to be the dynamic choice. And unfortunately, it's not really what's coming across to me. So right now we're on a motorway doing about 100 kilometers an hour, and truly the amount of road noise I'm getting in this is quite appalling. I say that because Mercedes-Benz's C-Class has now gotten significantly quieter with the current generation, and so I would have expected the LCI 3 Series to be quieter still. Now, wind noise, however, is very well suppressed because no doubt this car spent hours upon hours upon hours in a wind tunnel ensuring that there isn't even the slightest whistle that gets into this cabin, but the amount of intrusion from the tire noise is significant, which means that driving over longer distances at even higher speeds above the 95 that we're doing now, or 88 according to Waze, would become slightly more uncomfortable. Road noise is something that I like to pay attention to. The reason being that when vehicles have a little bit more ambient noise when you're ambling about, it does mean that you will end up feeling more exhausted when you arrive at your destination, particularly after a long drive. And so a nice, quiet, isolated cabin does mean that you will arrive at your destination feeling fresher than you would in something that is noisy. And then, of course, when you're trying to drive your 3 Series more dynamically, say on a nice twisty B road, unfortunately, while grip levels in this car are fantastic, and of course the balance in this vehicle is second to none because that's just what BMW does, the trouble is that I'm not getting enough communication from this car to make me believe that this is doing what it's supposed to be doing. Let me explain. So while these seats are very supportive, and I've got very good side bolsters that nice, like kind of hug me and keep me in place, particularly when I'm driving a little bit more aggressively, the trouble is that I'm getting absolutely zero feedback from the steering wheel. Now, of course, modern cars have significantly less in terms of communication than vehicles before, because that is simply the nature of technology. Electric power steering will not be able to convey the same sensations that hydraulic power steering can. And of course, the more meddling electronics there are, the more isolated the driver will be from the experience itself. However, I expect a little bit more from this car because, again, Mercedes-Benz's C-Class, traditionally seen as the more mature, more comfortable choice, is somehow more communicative than the BMW 3 Series, which seems like a very strange Uno reverso if you ask me. And so what that means is, while this car's chassis is definitely very capable, and of course the tires are fantastic, it does mean that when I'm out on a B road, I don't have the same kind of confidence required to go absolutely bombing down. And worst of all, even when I'm not speeding, I'm just not getting the sort of driving joy that I would expect to get from a BMW. It's very hard for me to quite succinctly put into words what driving joy is, but most BMWs have them. If you go back and watch my reviews of the BMW 5 Series and even the BMW 7 Series, I have talked about how these vehicles, despite being large, heavy luxury cars, remain very fun to drive. And so the 3 Series, being the smallest of the rear-wheel drive sort of pure BMW lot, because the 2 Series doesn't count, I would have expected those sensations to be dialed up, amplified, as it were. But that's not the case, because here it just feels too soft, too mature, and a bit too isolated. Now again, while the adaptive suspension does mean that this car is able to enjoy a wider breadth of abilities where comfort mode is more comfortable and dynamic mode is even more dynamic, the trouble is that in any of these modes, I'm just not enjoying myself. And that, I believe, is a cornerstone of the BMW 3 Series experience. I should know, I've had 3. And I've always enjoyed them simply because they provide a degree of driving dynamics that the other competitors simply cannot provide. Whereas in this, it feels that the competitors have closed the gap to a point where the difference is so negligible, so very negligible, that I would be remiss not to recommend something else. This is especially true when we talk about active safety because yes, the BMW 330i does come with blind spot monitoring and autonomous emergency braking, as well as a reverse camera if you want to call that part of active safety. I consider that a convenience feature. But you do not get anything in the way of adaptive cruise control, no stop and go function. You get lane departure alert, but that's about it. Now, if you were to compare that to the Volvo S60, which comes fully loaded with level 2 semi-autonomy systems, and it also has a more powerful 2-liter plug-in hybrid system, I think it's over 450 horsepower at this point, you begin to wonder whether or not the 330i makes sense. Because yes, if you can afford a M340i with its xDrive system and 6-cylinder up front, then yes, the BMW 3 Series remains the dynamic driver's choice. But if you're shopping towards the mid-range, then the S60 seems to be the vehicle that provides better value. And arguably, based on what I've been told, because I haven't driven one, the S60 is also pretty damn good to drive, which means the 3 Series' niche is getting attacked on all sides. So would I recommend a 3 Series? Well, if you are still infatuated with the BMW roundel for whatever reason, and believe me, I do understand, then the 3 Series remains a pretty decent choice. However, it's no longer the dynamic stunner that it used to be. Instead, it seems to just fall into the middle of the pack where everybody else seems to exist. Which means if you're looking for the most dynamic choice, you can't automatically default to a 3 Series. I would advise that you actually go and test drive the Mercedes-Benz C-Class and the Volvo S60 first. If you want simply the most powerful 4-cylinder currently available in this end of the market, then naturally look at the Volvo S60. I'd also suggest that if you spend a lot more time on the motorway, simply because that vehicle will be able to do more of the driving job, leaving you to simply enjoy the drive. And lastly, if you want the vehicle in the compact executive saloon segment that is guaranteed to make your neighbor's curtains twitch, then please consider the Mercedes-Benz C-Class, because there is nothing quite as flash as one of those. But arguably, the 3 Series and its heritage means that people will be coming into this expecting a more dynamic drive than anything else. And I guess to some extent that still remains true. It's just that the margins are not quite as large as it used to be. That head start that the 3 Series had is not quite as much of a head start as it used to be. So that is what it is. A bit complicated this time around. But then again, these cars are. But that's our review of the BMW 330i M Sport. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon to be notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All the links are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. We will catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe, and jangan bodoh.